Welcome to our first lecture for Philosophy 60 Ethics. So we're going to do a whole semester on the topic of ethics. And ethics is one of the main branches of philosophy. There are lots of different ways to carve up philosophy, but one of the common ways to do it is to divide it up into major branches, ethics being one of the major branches. Another major branch is metaphysics. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with questions about reality and the fundamental nature of things. So, for example, what is the fundamental nature of consciousness? So, computer scientists who are developing artificial intelligence are starting to have conversations with philosophers about whether or not machines or computers now or in the near future will have consciousness or be sentient or be able to use language or function like a human being or a person or something that has a mind, an agent. Another question that's asked by people who are experts in metaphysics is about existence. What sorts of things exist? Does God exist? That's a big question in metaphysics. And what's the nature of God? So, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the answer to the first question is yes. The answer to the second question is more complicated, but many of the leaders in these traditions will say that God has certain attributes, and those attributes at least include omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence. Now, you probably know what some of those terms mean. So, for example, omnipotence is a fancy way of saying being all powerful. Omniscience is a fancy way of saying being all knowing. And you might know that word benevolent, that's a part of omnibenevolence, which is about being wholly good or being all good or all loving. So those are some of the questions asked by people who study metaphysics. Another major branch of philosophy, so this will be our third branch, ethics being one, metaphysics being another. Third branch is called epistemology. Epistemology, or people who study epistemology, they ask questions about knowledge and the limits of knowledge. So one fundamental question in that discipline, or subdiscipline rather, is we have lots of beliefs, and should any of those or do any of those beliefs count as knowledge? There's lots of things I believe, but there's a difference between believing something and knowing something. Someone might believe that the earth is flat, or might believe in Sasquatch or the existence of leprechauns. But that doesn't mean that the person knows that the earth is flat or that leprechauns exist or the Loch Ness monster or Bigfoot. Sometimes people believe something, they end up being right or correct, or their belief is true, we might say, but we still don't want to call it knowledge. So, for instance, if I asked you to guess a number between 1 and 10, and you guessed 4, and it turns out that was the number that I had in mind, you believed that it was 4. It was true that it was 4, but did you know that it was 4? Most people say no, you didn't know. So a traditional analysis of the concept knowledge is that it has to be something a person believes. It has to be a true belief, but then there also needs to be justification. So knowledge, since Plato, a very important philosopher from the Western history of philosophy, from almost 2,500 years ago, knowledge, since Plato, has been analyzed as true, justified belief. So that's a big question in epistemology. Another major branch of philosophy is logic, which more or less is the study of correct reasoning. So if I told you that all A's are B's, would it follow that all B's are A's. So sort of the other direction. You could pause and think about that for a second. If all A's are B's, does that mean that all B's are A's? And the answer is that does not follow. So that inference is not good, or as philosophers sometimes say, it's an invalid inference. Just because all A's are B's, it doesn't follow that all B's are A's. And there are many counterexamples to that sort of reasoning. Think about players on teams. Take the Golden State Warriors, for instance. It's true that every Golden State Warrior is a member of the NBA. But the other direction doesn't follow. Just because you're a member of the NBA doesn't mean you're on the Warriors. If that were the case, then the Warriors would have all the players, and it would be very easy to beat any other team, which would have no players. So logic is the study of correct reasoning, and philosophers have developed sophisticated tools and methodologies that help us test inferences to see if they are any good, to see if they are deductively valid. That's some fancy way of saying the inference or the reasoning is good. So to review, the major branches of philosophy are ethics, or sometimes more generally, the field is known as value theory, which might include the study of art or beauty, maybe some aspects of political philosophy or social philosophy, aesthetics, which is another, which overlaps or is the same as philosophy of beauty and art. So ethics, or value theory, metaphysics, or theories on reality, existence, and the fundamental nature of things, questions about being. Number 3, we have epistemology, theories about knowledge, and then finally logic, study of correct inferences and reasoning. So we're going to talk about ethics. This whole semester is on ethics. If you take some other philosophy courses, then you would most likely talk about issues from those other branches. So now that we have been more specific about branches of philosophy, let's get more specific about ethics. Ethics is more or less the study of morality, or the study of morally correct behavior, or of right and wrong. And in fact, philosophers usually will use the term ethics and morality or moral philosophy interchangeably. So often I will say, is it ethically, is it morally good? Basically to mean the same thing. Ethics gets divided, just like philosophy, into subdivision. The most general sorts of questions or issues in ethics falls within a field called metaethics. So metaethicists are persons who ask the most general sort of questions that have to do with ethical issues. So here are a couple examples. Is there a universal moral rule? And then you see a picture there of a character from an animated sitcom that a lot of you will recognize, Family Guy. So this is a character who is notorious for having some very morally dubious inclinations. So has a attraction to children, is some sort of a pedophile. A lot of students that take these intro to ethics courses, they tend to be very sympathetic with some sort of subjectivism or relativism when it comes to ethics. That I've got my own moral code, you've got your own moral code, and I cannot correctly criticize your moral code and vice versa. So there's no overarching moral code. It really varies from person to person or culture to culture. So whether or not there is universality in ethics, or should we just admit that morality is just relative to individuals or cultures, say, that is a fundamental question in ethics. So that would be, you'd be doing metaethics. Another issue in metaethics is the distinction between facts and values. So you can see in this image here, it reads, science can tell you how to clone a Tyrannosaurus rex. Philosophy, on the other hand, can tell you why this might be a bad idea. So science can tell us the procedure about how we would go about to clone, say, a Tyrannosaurus rex. So that would be a step-by-step detailed description of how to do something, right? So it would be, here's the set of facts for how to clone a T-Rex. But what science cannot do, or at least what philosophers argue, goes beyond the bounds of science, is whether or not it would be a good idea, whether or not it would be ethically sound to use these facts, to use this information. So we've left science and now we've entered into the realm of philosophy. Something a little bit more, a bit more within the current abilities of scientists and computer scientists are ethical issues surrounding self-driving cars. So we know the facts, we know the information when it comes to how to build a self-driving car. We either have it or we're very, very close. And maybe by the time you hear this, they will be on the road. But what are the ethics of self-driving cars? So for instance, a programmer for the self-driving car might be able to program, write a program that will tell the car what to do in certain situations. So if the car comes to a stop sign, the program tells it to stop. If the car comes to a green light, the program tells it to go. Well, what should the computer scientist write into the program to essentially tell the computer to do if there is say a bunch of pedestrians that are in the way? Well, then the car should swerve, right? Fine, so that's an easy program to write. Well, what about the situation where the only place the car can swerve is to hit another pedestrian? So you might say, well, it's obvious, right? If the outcomes are either 5 people get crushed by the car or 1 person gets crushed by the car, then the computer scientist should tell the car, or should write the program to go with the 1 over the 5, minimize the damage, right? But notice that's not a factual issue about what should the car do. That's an ethical issue. So science can't really tell us the right way to program that. Now we have to have discussions about moral philosophy. So that's an issue in metaethics, excuse me. You can see those words are very close. Distinguishing between facts and values. One more example would be, just because it is the case that human beings say, tend to be dishonest sometimes, or tend to be unfaithful to their partners in romantic relationships. You could say an anthropologist or a sociologist might document the fact that this is a human tendency. We don't always engage in these behaviors, but it's frequent enough that it is a documented phenomenon. So it is the case. It is a fact that humans cheat and lie and steal X% of the time. But that doesn't mean that it ought to be that way, right? So then we are talking about values. Okay, so that's metaethics. So here's the second subdivision of ethics, and we're going to call this normative ethics. So the 3 images here are of some major thinkers in the history of philosophy. So we'll make a note right away that they're all men, and they're all men from the West, or the so-called West, from Europe or near Europe. So just like many other subjects, philosophy, unfortunately, has a history that is accidentally dominated by people from a particular group and has disenfranchised and has not fully appreciated the voice from other communities. So this is something that we are all aware of, that we are trying to change. And so that's one of the things we'll do in this class, is we will hear from some of those voices that have either been ignored or have been silenced. But just so you're aware of this history, we're going to talk about three figures and their big ideas when it comes to ethics. So when you have a major theory, a major ethical theory, it's often called a normative theory. So on the left, we have an image of John Stuart Mill. So he's an English thinker. And in a nutshell, his big idea on ethics is we should act in such a way that the results or the outcome or the consequences of our behavior will be the best. He's known as a utilitarian or a consequentialist, because the maximization of utility, which more or less is happiness or pleasure or good results, is what we should be after. Now, it's not just the welfare or happiness or utility of an individual. That would be egoism, which we will talk about in this course. It is the welfare or the good consequences for everyone affected by your actions. In the middle, we have a German thinker named Immanuel Kant. So Kant's big idea was that morality shouldn't be consequence-based. It should be duty-based and intention-based, and that we shouldn't use people as mere means to an end. And we should behave in such a way that if we imagine everyone behaving in that way, the world would be able to function well. Or in other words, if you think about lying or cutting in line or stealing, we often tell each other or tell our children, you shouldn't do that. Imagine if everyone would do that. The world would fall apart. It would be chaotic. So that's a signal that the action is morally questionable. It's morally wrong or morally impermissible. Shouldn't be permitted. And on the right, we have an ancient Greek philosopher who's actually the student of Plato. That's Aristotle. So Aristotle, in the last century and up until now, has been brought back into the philosophical discussion of ethics. His big idea centers on virtues or character traits. Aristotle believed that while it may be difficult to come up with a single moral principle that can guide all of our actions, what we can do is work on developing virtues, character traits like generosity and courage and modesty and even wit. And if we can develop all these things, then we will achieve what he called eudaimonia, which is ancient Greek for flourishing. So if you want to thrive or flourish as a person, and then if everyone's doing that as a community, then we all need to work on character traits, much like you would work on developing a talent or develop your ability at a sport. You got to practice, 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 and you need good mentors and teachers. So all of them had big ideas. They all had normative theories. Now, later in the course, as a group, we'll try to decide which of these theories is the best. Which of them should we go with? And that question itself is more fundamental. And so that question would be a metaethical question. So it's another example of metaethics. Whenever we try to apply these big ideas to specific moral cases, we're doing applied ethics. So here's an example of an applied ethics case. Suppose you're at the grocery store, and upon leaving, you see a wallet on the ground. You open it up, there's lots of cash, but there's also a driver's license that has personal information of the wallet's owner. So what should you do? Well, that's why these thinkers like Mill, John Stuart Mill, and Immanuel Kant, and Aristotle, they came up with these normative views to help us figure out what to do in these cases. So we have a general principle or general method which we can apply to the cases. Well, we're going to get different answers, or well, not always, but often we'll get different answers from these different theorists. So in this wallet case, the middle fellow there, Immanuel Kant, he would argue, probably, it's hard to say, he's been dead for a long time, he would probably argue that we should return the wallet to its rightful owner and that we have a duty to return that wallet because we owe it to that person, because we don't deserve the wallet. It's not ours. It belongs to someone else. It would be theft otherwise. Now, on the left, we might get a different answer from the Englishman, John Stuart Mill. He might argue, wait a second. Did you look at all the money in that wallet? Suppose there was $1,000 in that wallet. Think of all the good you could do with that money. Yes, you could return it to the owner, but so then one person has $1,000. And if it was somebody, let's say you found the wallet in a wealthy area, maybe the person has plenty of money and that $1,000 they lost wouldn't really make that much of a difference in their lives. Let's build that into the case. Kant would still argue, doesn't matter how wealthy they are, you should return the wallet to its rightful owner. And a lot of us would probably agree, like that's probably what we should do. But someone like John Stuart Mill might argue, wait a second, we could go that direction, and that would yield some utility or some happiness, especially to the owner of the wallet. Have you ever lost a wallet and someone helped you, returned it to you? You feel great, you feel elated. And then if you are the person who returned the wallet, you might even feel good, right? So we're getting these utility points that we might be able to even quantify. But someone like Mill might make the point, wait a second. Again, think about what we could do with that $1,000. If we sent that $1,000 to some humble, innocent children who are struggling in a third world country, we could feed them and clothe them and give them medicine and clean water and perhaps save the lives of many innocent children. So we would get more bang for our buck, as it were, if we use the money in a different way. So we could get better consequences if we don't return the money to the owner of the wallet. So you see, we have one case, but we have two different potential directions to go in trying to answer what should we do about the case. And so that's a really good example of what we're doing in this class. We are taking these theories and we're applying to the cases, and then using the application to help us decide if these theories are any good. So then we'll have a discussion, and you'll do this in the discussion boards in the discussion section of our homepage on Canvas. Talk about that. Who do you think has got it right? Should you return the wallet to its rightful owner, or should you just say, hey, that person's wealthy, they don't really need the cash, I can save a bunch of children, that would be better. What is the morally correct thing to do? And the more clear thinking, critically thinking, maybe even philosophically trained people that tend to side with one theory or one thinker over another, that bodes well for that theory, and that bolsters it in the philosophical literature, and it will be more popular and it will be advanced as the correct theory. It's more evidence that it's the one that we should go with. So again, to recap, we're doing philosophy in this course, and what I didn't say is philosophy is after wisdom. Actually, the word philosophy is rooted in ancient Greek words, philo and sophia. Philo roughly means love of, and Sophia roughly means wisdom. So love of philosophy nearly literally means love of wisdom. And the way that philosophers try to arrive at this wisdom is through a methodology. Philosophy is much more an activity than it is a set of ideas or beliefs. Philosophy is something that you do more than something that you have or possess. So philosophers use reason, they use arguments, they use critical thinking, they use classes, they use colloquia, They use conversations with other philosophical experts. They're now experimental philosophers who are surveying people and getting their intuitions. They use conceptual analysis. They use all these tools and methodology to help them rid themselves of unwarranted beliefs and fill their minds with hopefully true justified belief, with knowledge and even wisdom. So that's what philosophy is. More of a method, as I said. And then again, to recap, 4 major areas of philosophy, at least Ryan's way to slice up the pie is ethics is one major area, also known as value theory. We've got metaphysics, theory of reality. We've got epistemology, which is theory of knowledge. By the way, epistemology is spelled E, P as in Paul, I, S, T as in Tom. So that's epis, and then E, M, epistem, and then ology. O, L, O, G, Y, epistemology. Metaphysics is M as in mom, E, T, A, and then physics, that's the word you probably know, P, H, Y, S, I, C, S. I'm noticing here that spelling out loud is certainly not my strong suit, so hopefully I didn't botch that up. So we've got ethics or value theory, metaphysics, theory of reality. We've got epistemology, theory of knowledge, and then finally logic's study of correct reasoning. Okay, that sums up our first intro lecture to ethics.